Shalom Aleichem. Ooh. Shalom Aleichem.
Maybe we'll try to do this without
No.
Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Okay. Shalom Aleichem, Baruchem, Haboim, Taire Freund, Bonsoir et bienvenue. Hello and good evening, dear friends. It is a real honor and privilege to be with you all tonight to welcome Goldie home and to celebrate this wonderful new book. So Goldie, I'll start with you. Let's go to the basics. We heard a bit about both of these. We heard a bit about both of these women, but I was wondering if you could give us a bit more context, both about Chava Rosenfarb and Zenia Larsson. Who were these women, and what was the relationship between them?
Okay, so can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Zenia and Chava, my mother, were best friends from childhood on. They met in Lodz, obviously, and they didn't go to the same school because Zenia never learned Yiddish. She knew Yiddish, but she never was at home with it. So they communicated in Polish, but they were best friends. They hung out together. They did all of that. During the war, they were both in the Lodz ghetto, and they lived through some horrors together, including the fact, I don't know if that's in the book, that Chava discovered the suicide of Zenia's father. In the ghetto, he killed himself because he was sick with tuberculosis, and he was afraid that he wanted his daughter and his second wife, Zenia's stepmother, to get his ration cards. So they then were, when the ghetto was liquidated, they were both sent to Auschwitz. They passed the selection together, and they both miraculously went together. They survived Auschwitz. They were there only for a few days, and they were sent to a labor camp. Sorry, at Zazzle, and from there they were eventually, when the Allies started to come in closer and closer to where the concentration camps where they were sent to Bergen-Belsen, and they were eventually liberated at Bergen-Belsen. I mean, they were literally left to die in Belsen. When during the liberation, so Bergen-Belsen camp was destroyed by the British who liberated the camp, and everybody was sent to another camp nearby that was called Bergen-Belsen DP camp. From there, the Swedish government came down and offered asylum to pretty much to any of the survivors who wanted to take it. And Zenia decided that she had had enough of togetherness with my mother and my mother's family, and she took the offer, and that's why she ended up in Sweden. My mother and my aunt, her sister, and my grandmother, who also survived the war, they stayed on in Germany because they heard rumors that their father, my grandfather, was alive, and my father, my mother's boyfriend from before the war, who many of you I know, you know who he was, that he too had survived. As it turned out, only my father had survived, and so my mother and her sister went wandering all around Germany. They eventually came back. They couldn't stay in Germany anymore. They learned my father had found them, and they learned from him that my grandfather had been killed by the Americans of all people, and they decided they couldn't stand staying in Germany anymore. They crossed the border illegally into Belgium, and they stayed in Belgium for another 5 years but they had no right to live there legally, and they had to keep moving, and they had to find a place that would accept them. So the letters start, really the first letter is end of 1945, when Chava is already in Brussels, and she is writing to Zenia, who is in Sweden. And the first exchange of letters is about the difficulties of adjusting to this kind of new world. So.
And I will get used to that, as will you. And the letters are not written in Yiddish, they're not written in Swedish, they're written in Polish, because this was the common language that these two women had. What is significant about this correspondence? We have 30 years of letters here. What is important to take away from here in broad strokes?
Oh, that's a big question. I guess just that first of all, I think the letters are a tribute to friendship altogether. And what I like about them is that the friendship does not always run smoothly. They have arguments all the time, and towards the end there is a big blow up, which I don't want to tell you about because I want you to read the book. So that's one thing. The other thing is just, I think there's been a lot written about the Holocaust, about what people went through. I think there's been less written about the lives of survivors, especially after, like immediately after the war. How did they manage? How did they get their footholds back in life? And I think the letters certainly add to that. Also, it's letters between two women, and I must say I haven't seen that anywhere. So I think that's really what they contribute in terms of history and in terms of what happened after the war. I've discovered that a lot of people know there was a Holocaust, and that was it, right? That's sort of history stops there, and of course it didn't.
And how does their, I know you don't want to give too much away, but how does their relationship change over the decades? What are the sort of rises and falls of this friendship as these two women, their lives change so drastically from the life they shared before?
Well, I guess in terms of rising and falling, I'm not quite sure how to answer that. But there's there are things in the letters that I'm going to answer the question by not answering the question. There are things in the letters that I did not know or didn't appreciate. First of all, about the adjustment. Secondly, for my mother in particular, she knew she couldn't stay in Brussels, in Belgium. And so looking for a place for asylum, for a place that would welcome them, that I found interesting. I sort of knew about it vaguely, but I didn't know about it in that much detail. I also learned things about my parents before they became my parents. In other words, I don't arrive until my mother gets to Montreal, and there's 5 years before then, and their relationship. And I found that very, very, very interesting. Obviously, I mean, it's my parents, and I also wasn't there, so I don't know. And Zenia, her adaptation, her wish to, she was a very forceful character. She wanted to go to art school, and nothing was going to stop her, and she did, and she did. And she became a sculptor, and she was very determined. She learned Swedish, but for me, one of the most moving letters is when she falls in love with a Swedish man, and she asks Chava, is it a betrayal of the people who died that we the experience of the Jewish people who died if I marry this man. And Chava, who had been lecturing her, my mother had a tendency to lecture. Chava had been lecturing her that you shouldn't marry a non-Jew and you shouldn't, and it's a terrible thing to do. But when Zenia actually says, I have met this man, I am interested, I want to marry him, would this be a terrible thing to do? And my mother says, no, you go ahead and do what your heart tells you to do, because that's, in the end, that's what matters. So I thought that was quite moving too.
It is quite astounding how even over the years, when their connection is so attenuated, they still come to each other as confidants.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about their isolation from their surroundings, but they can connect with each other in some kind of deep and fundamental way, and it's quite moving. And that moment in particular is very much evocative of that dynamic.
Yeah. The other thing about the letters that I still find it's amusing, but it's also not, is they get mad at each other when somebody doesn't answer a letter quickly enough. And it's like lovers, you know, what do you mean? You didn't write to me, I'm not talking to you, I'm going to punish you. I won't write to you either, and so then, and it goes back and forth like that. And I wondered, like, so they had a very deep connection, obviously, and you always want your friends to write to you, but I started to wonder if there wasn't more to it, if it wasn't a question of they've lost so much in a personal level, people close to them, Zenia in particular, and no family left at all. She's all alone. And plus when people in the ghetto didn't show up or didn't respond, you didn't know if they were alive or dead. And so some of that, I think, is a bit exaggerated. From my point of view, as a North American, it's strange to me. But on the other hand, I think it also has a lot to do with what they've just lived through.
And you know, you see both their physical, cultural adaptation to their new lives, but as you're saying, their psychological adaptation to carry this trauma and to cope with it throughout the decades. And they rely on each other both to help each other through those moments, but also to sort of process those moments, and they take out their trauma on each other at times as well.
Yeah,
so the book itself has an interesting story, and I think before we get much deeper into the nuances of the letters, I was wondering if you could speak a bit about how the book came about.
Well, it came about because I found, so after my mother's death, I was going through her papers. I'm still going through her papers, it's like 13 years later, but I came across a packet of letters, and they were written in Polish. But I know enough Polish to read my mother's signature, and I realized immediately that these were the letters that Zenia had sent back, I'm giving away the ending, had sent back to my mother. And my mother had been very upset. She suddenly got a packet of her letters back in the mail from Zenia. Without explanation, without anything, and they just arrived, and she didn't know why, and she thought, Zenia does not want to be friends with me anymore, Zenia hates me, and there was not a word of why. At the same time, a letter from Zenia did arrive saying, please send back my letters. And my mother reread Zenia's letters and sent them back. So what I found was my mother's letters, and I was dying to know what was in them. And I don't know Polish at all. And so I looked around for a translator, and I found one from Polish to English. And then when Krzysztof finished with the translations, I realized I had a book. What Zenia had done with her own letters was to publish them in a book in Swedish, another language that I do not know at all. So I had to find another translator And eventually, through a stroke of luck of a friend, I was led to Sylvia Söderlund, who was a professor at Queen's University, but who was from Sweden. And she had apparently done translations. So I got in touch with her, and then I had 2 sets of letters, and I thought, if I put them together, I will have a back and forth, and I might have a book, and that's eventually how that came to be.
And so the Swedish side of the story, do you see how Zenia might have changed or edited or refined her side before she put it out? Because she published it in her own lifetime.
Yeah, oh yes, yes. Well, she changed my name into a name she changed all the names. I think she probably was afraid that people would recognize who she was writing to. And it probably had something to do with privacy, but she called me Sandy. I never thought of myself as a Sandy. She changed every name. My mother was Lynn. Lynn is a Scandinavian name. It's not a Jewish name even. She pretends in her book that my mother's living in Australia. So she picks a Commonwealth country, but it's not the right one, it's Canada. So she made all kinds of little changes like that. Some letters she left out, which I didn't know until I put the letters together. If she actually changed what was in her own letters, I have no way of knowing. I don't have her letters, the originals. I just have the Swedish book.
Do you have a sense that something might have been changed or massaged in her side of the correspondence?
I don't, no. I really can't tell. I have no way of knowing that. There's nothing in her letters that is particularly offensive in any way. So I don't know. I know that she left out some letters. And she left out a very important letter that she wrote, which she probably thought was too personal. So I understood why she left it out. But if she changed things, I really couldn't say.
And from your perspective, you know, you have been working, first you worked with your mother, you've been working with your mother's work for decades at this point, but you were working from a language you understood, you could translate. What was it like to be working with this material? And we'll talk about the translation in a moment. But for you, what was it like to work on this project where you did not have access to the original? We'll start there, and then I want to go further.
I have to say I am enormously grateful to my translators, to both of them. And actually the book is dedicated to them, to Krzysztof and to Sylvia, because I'm going to start crying, because it opened doors for me that would otherwise have remained closed. That I first of all, the early life of both my parents in Brussels after the war, I would not have known that unless if I hadn't had somebody to translate. And so for just my mother's side of it, it mattered enormously to me, and also to see what your mother thinks of you when you're not around, when she's talking to her friend and she doesn't have to censor herself. I mean, that's also a revelation of another kind. But it, so I really was very grateful, which is almost not a strong enough word to both the translators, because it allowed me, it restored my past to me in a sense too, and that mattered.
How do you think your mother would have felt about her letters being published?
That's a very good question, and I've asked myself that too. There's one letter in particular that I agonized over whether or not to include it. And I decided that my mother was dead by this time, and I couldn't hurt her. And I also think if I'm going to, like we become, after we die, we become third person. We live our lives as first person, but after we're dead, we're third person. We're characters in someone else's novel, in a sense. And I think that I felt that it was important. The letter is about my father, and it's not a very, it is a very personal letter, and the one letter that Zenia left out was her response to this letter, where my mother is complaining about my father's infidelities, of which there were many. So I thought about it, and then I thought, why not? Like, whom am I protecting? Not me, because I certainly knew, not my brother, nobody who knew my father didn't know about this. So who would I be protecting? And it's a very, it's a very moving letter, I think. So I included it. I know that people say that letters are personal and you're not supposed to show your letters to anybody else, and there's a whole thing about letters. But I think once you're dead, they're not personal anymore. Well, that's not entirely true, but it feels like, I think my mother would forgive me, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And I think, you know, your readers, or her readers, we learn about their relationship, we learn about, you know, the trajectory of their lives in a much realer and more intimate way because of the decisions that you have made to publish them. And so I'm grateful to you and your translators.
And the problem with my father is he's so well known. And I was just talking to somebody, there's just been a book that's come out in French about him. So I've always hesitated to speak about him because a part of me wants to be proud of him and, you know, great figure in the women's movement in Canada. But another part of me knows that he was not a nice man. And I want people to know that too. So I guess I want to have both sides of it. I want to be able to bask in the glory of a famous father, but I also want people to know that there were problems with him, and quite serious ones. So that was another reason why I published that letter.
And can you just clarify for those in the audience who might not know who your father was, just a few words about, you know, this the towering figure part.
My father's Goldie Morgentaler, is a doctor, and he was one of the leaders. He wasn't the lead of the abortion campaign in Canada. Certainly he was in the papers all the time and became very, very famous. There's a park, I think, in Montreal, named after him. There's now a comic that has come out about him in French, and a book on the history of abortion in Quebec, also in French, that has just been published. And there's a podcast going on right now on CBC English about his abortion fight. So that just, if you don't know, it gives you some sense.
I did think it was just important for context. If someone doesn't know, this is also another layer in this very layered and textured book. I'd like to turn now to questions of translation. Krzysztof, we'll also start, you know, in broad strokes. What were the challenges of translating a project like this that has so many layers and different sort of outside factors affecting your work?
So I'll start by saying that this is all 8 years ago, I think, when we were working on those letters, when I received the first packet, because they came in packets, so I didn't see the whole material at first. So the challenges were many, in fact. First of all, I don't usually translate from Polish into English, but rather the reverse. That's my main occupation, so to speak. Letters, I have done some. I've translated the correspondence of Allen Ginsberg, for example, but these are very different letters in the sense that Ginsberg often knows that these letters are being written with for posterity, that they will be published. He does make it known. So I knew immediately after reading, again, just one part of the story, because at the time we didn't have the other side, so I only had the letters that Chava had written to Zenia. I knew immediately that these were not letters intended for publication, and there's no coyness about it in the letters. They are intimate correspondence. I rarely translate women writers. This was another challenge, I think, not only to speak in the voice of a woman, but also to speak in English from another language about such private matters, often because they talk about health, for example, family life, and so forth. But probably the greatest challenge was the fragmentation and fragmentariness of the narrative, because often I had no way of knowing what this heated response of a letter was in response to, what had caused this outburst. There were, as one often does when one responds to a letter, there were references to fragments of you write this and that, and we didn't have the other part. So I did reread the whole thing when Goldie was putting the book together. So now I could see how the letters fit, and sometimes I reworked a fragment because now the other letter made clear, or not always clear. I may mention a fragment or two where I thought the other letter did not quite clarify. It was about the smile, for example. I mentioned this. There's something about the broad smile or broad laugh. We wondered about this. This is a strange fragment, but maybe very technical. Let me know if you want to hear more about this. So yes. Another was, of course, these were letters written by two women who, the further this went, the less they felt connected to the language. Chava had probably no other context in which she would have used Polish by the time, except for the letter writing, or so. And Zenia, it seems, lived entirely in Swedish by that time. So from time to time, as those of you who have read the book know, from time to time they vent their frustration about having to use this language. So so this is a language that is, of course, of a certain era. It is written in the 1940s and 50s, 60s, but it was learned much earlier. It's the language mostly of the 1930s. Very flowery, very ornate somehow, which is partly, I think, the temperament of the two women, and partly the tradition of at least Polish letter writing. This is maybe something to compare also to the Yiddish tradition, but Polish letter writing of the time would have been very intense and heated even. So when you were mentioning some of those fragments that read almost like lovers' quarrels, that is also somehow typical of the Polish letter writing tradition. And finally, graphological, I might say. I am no graphologist, but what I could do was to enlarge the fragments. I got scans from Goldie, very good quality, so I was able to look at words and look at the letters up close, and sometimes I sent words in square brackets saying, I'm not really sure if this is the word. It seems like the word, it fits here. And I think, Goldie, you made, sometimes you had to make the decision, the editorial decision, to accept what I suggested rather than leave that. So maybe, should I say something about this smile and laugh
Yes, please.
conundrum? Because in one of the letters that I translated, Chava says to Zenia, you wrote in one of your letters that I have this broad smile. That's the way that I translated this in the first draft, because the Polish was, I think, śmiejesz się szeroko, which is something like you smile or you laugh broadly. It's a very strange, it sounds like a mixture of two things. In Polish, laugh and smile are very close. It's for example, śmiech and uśmiech, or śmiejesz się, uśmiechasz się. They're very, very similar. So I thought, because the word broadly was used there, I thought that Chava meant that Zenia was remembering her broad smile. But when I read the other half, it seemed from Sylvia's translation that Zenia writes about her broad laughter, not the smile, but laughter. And I wasn't sure what to do with this, so I flagged this, and I gave a comment there. And I frankly, I don't remember what we did with that in the end. But I think it's one of those moments where I think it's undecided, because Zenia was self-translating too. So she might have, and Per Axel, her husband, was correcting this, but he had no way of knowing, in fact, exactly what she meant at every moment. He might not have noticed this. This is such a small thing. So
he wouldn't have had what to compare it to.
Right, exactly. So I think it's one of those moments where it's not clear. So it's either a broad smile or broad laughter, if that makes sense in English. And it probably does. Yes. So it may be either or.
Was the Swedish translator ever involved in how you worked, or Goldie, if you could speak to how you worked with the Swedish translator as an editor?
I just asked her. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. I just asked her to translate. I'm dealing with a language I don't even know my way in, so I have to rely entirely on her. And she had trouble finding the book. I was going to send her the book. Zenia's books are, I have all of them because she sent them to my mother, who could not read them. And but I have all of them. And so I thought maybe Sylvia, Zenia, I'm just allowed to make a bit of a detour. Zenia's first novel, which was a trilogy, just like my mother's, was about the Lodz Ghetto, not entirely similar to my mother's The Tree of Life, but she also thought in terms of a trilogy, was about the Holocaust. And as I think somebody said, this was the first that the Swedish public read fiction about the Holocaust and learned what the Jews had gone through. They really did not know. And it was also the Jewish survivors who went to Sweden were the first group of non-Christians that really were allowed into that country in any significant numbers. So, and now I've lost my train of thought. When Sylvia, when I asked Sylvia to translate the book, she went looking for it. I know what I was going to say. So Zenia became a very well-known novelist in Sweden. She had enormous success in Swedish, with the Swedish public. But when I started to get interested in this, and I found my mother's letters, and I wanted Sylvia to translate, she went looking for books, and she couldn't find. Because Zenia, I went looking for where Zenia's archives might be. Writers always leave archives. Nobody seemed to know. I called all the libraries I could think of in Sweden, and nobody had them. And I was surprised. I mean, it's such a well-known writer, and suddenly she's in total obscurity. The moral is have children. because Zenia had no children, so there was no one she had no heirs. I eventually did, her archives were eventually located. But in any case, so Sylvia went looking for the book, so I said, I will send you my copy. And finally she located one of the book of letters in a secondhand bookstore, and that's how she got to translate. So she was translating only from the written text, She never saw letters or anything like that. I think I lost your question.
Oh, this is we're talking about the Swedish translator and translation.
Yeah.
So,
and whether she was involved in. I did not communicate with Sylvia, so I saw the final book put together before it's.
But you did complain that you didn't know what the answers were.
Yes, well, because it is such an unusual.
It's like one hand clap.
Yes, yes. Well, may I come back to the challenges for just a moment? I usually, when I don't translate correspondence, I usually translate fiction, where there is a certain design, so you know what each element is supposed to do. But here, without having the other half, and it's not a literary concept that the other half is missing, there's a lot that you cannot fill otherwise. But I knew that you were the editor. That was my hope. I knew that you were able to fill in some of the blanks, and you sometimes did. You knew exactly what they meant when they were referring, even if a letter was missing, we didn't see the other letter, you knew what the situation was that they were referring to. So this was, probably I would not have undertaken this task if I didn't have you as the person who would oversee the entire process, because I would feel there's so much that I don't know. There's the other half is missing. Yes, there's much that needs to be filled in.
But I think very often with letters, you don't have a context, right? I mean, people ask to have letters translated all the time, like Yiddish letters. There are always requests for somebody who can read Yiddish handwriting. So you usually don't have the context, like you don't have the response, but you just have the letter. And even that is meaningful, I think, too.
it really just goes to show how unique of a project, of a document the book is. And what is so striking to me, you have these two women who have sort of this, quite literally the same point of origin. And their lives get more and more different, and yet they both write trilogies about their war experiences. And for Zenia, also the post-war experience is part of her work. But you have these parallels. At the same time, you have these very drastic departures from one another. And whereas Zenia Larsson has disappeared by and large from the Swedish literary landscape, I will say that one of the benefits of having a child is sometimes that child becomes a translator herself, and Chava Rosenfarb's works in English are more and more well known to a wider and wider public.
Thank you, but I think I was joking about having a child, but only partly, because even if the child is not a translator and couldn't care less, somebody is inheriting, first of all, usually the rights to the works, and can be asked, and also the knowledge of what it was like to have this famous writer as a parent, and that makes a difference. So, and Zenia couldn't have children, which is why there are wonderful letters about her dog, which she adopted instead. So that's what I meant by it matters if you have children in that sense. Like in terms of literary legacy, I think it does matter.
And I, again, want to thank you for sharing that legacy with all of us, and to bringing these two friends back together in one volume. We're almost out of time, and I do want to have at least a few moments for questions from the audience. Before we do, Krzysztof, you picked a particular passage that struck with you from the book, and I was wondering if you could share with us now that moment.
Yes, when you asked if there were passages that we remembered very clearly, this was the one. So this is the 13th of August, 1947. It's written from Middelkerke, and the beginning is self-explanatory, and should I? Well, no, I won't say more. I will just read it. My dear Zenia, I'm writing to you from the Bundist camp Zukunft, which is meeting at the seaside this year. It's beautiful here. Our bedroom windows overlook the sea. When I lie in bed, I hear the eternal, endless symphony of sea waves, and I feel as if I were on a ship headed for some unknown land of happiness. In this manner, I set sail for the land of dreams every night. Henyek and Henya are here with me. Mother is staying nearby at the YAF camp, so I can allow myself some peace and joy. The joy of being intoxicated with beauty and freedom is absolute and yet painful. You know very well why this is so. You know what it means to be swimming in the sea, carried by waves of sun-dazzled water, and to be suddenly visited by painful memories of the past. My body experiences joy and delight, and all of a sudden my mind hears the whispers of loved ones who are gone. How that hurts, how everything suddenly shrinks, how the bronzed, healthy chest, glittering with the sun's gold, suddenly heaves with a helpless whimper. Imagine the sea breeze, the very power of life. I'm strolling along the beach, my feet sinking into the hot sandy dunes, and I see before me my father or Shayevich. I know, Zenia, that they will never leave me now. I am luckier than others who have lost everything, but no one can replace those whom I have lost, and my longing for them will last as long as I live. No joy of mine will ever be complete, because they are not here.
Thank you. These letters were clearly written by two extraordinarily talented women who could convey such depth of feeling so freely to each other, and I thank both of you for making that available to all of us. Before I turn it over to questions, Goldie Morgentaler, Krzysztof Majer, and now we just have a few moments for some questions. I think down here, there's a microphone that will be coming.
We're on the wrong side.
I'm sorry to draw attention to a different book, but I don't know if you've heard about it, and if you haven't heard about it, I strongly recommend you should. This is a book that is called The